With the release of Bloodlines earlier this year, the Final Destination franchise has found itself once again back in the mainstream conversation, with Bloodlines being a first Final Destination movie for 14 years, which, given how horror tends to work, is pretty nuts to think about. Since the first movie hit screens back in 2000, each subsequent offering has largely followed a consistent formula. Someone having a vision of a major disaster, avoiding that disaster, and then death, death comes to stalk those survivors, complete with some glorious, brutal kills. Now, the franchise might not have always scored favourably with critics, but for the most part, fans tend to view Final Destination as one of the more consistent franchises in horror. But still, which film ranks as the absolute best, and which turkey ranks as the absolute worst? That's what we're here today to find out. So with that in mind, I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here's every Final Destination movie ranked worst to best. Number 6, The Final Destination. While different people will rank these movies slightly differently, of course, one thing that seems to be a consensus amongst Final Destination fans is that The Final Destination is the worst Final Destination. Even franchise producer Craig Perry recently said that, yeah, this one sucks. It doesn't help that the film was released in 2009, at a time when Hollywood was obsessed with 3D, and yeah, this one basically coasts along on that gimmick while ignoring stuff like, storytelling, likable characters, originality, and most importantly, suspense, or convincing CGI for that point. As for the 3D, it was actually implemented pretty well, but the turkey, it is still a turkey, and this movie has feathers, goes gobble gobble, and is best served with cranberry sauce. Given the nature of the general Final Destination concept, the first two sequels did clearly remix some elements of the original film, but at least those films were made with passion and creativity. This one feels like it was made by an algorithm, just lifeless, paint by numbers, a boring film full of boring characters, and an all-round awful cast. Even those hoping just to see a fun bit of gore, again, you're left disappointed here. Apart from the opening racetrack scene, the death sequences are so vanilla and lacking in any sort of personality, many feeling ripped off from other Final Destination media, including a certain bathtub scene being a carbon copy of a death scene in the Final Destination spin-off novel End of the Line, which again highlights the film's lack of any creativity. Number 5, Final Destination 5. Final Destination 5 is a bit of a strange one. On the one hand, it could be the finest of the bunch on a technical level, with director Steve Quayle doing a remarkable job here. Of course, it also has that ending, an ending that came as a brilliant shock when you realise you've actually been watching a prequel to the original movie, with our surviving lovebirds Sam and Molly boarding the one and the same doomed Volley Airlines Flight 180 from the first film. Plus, the opening bridge collapse premonition is great, and there's some fun, tense death scenes. The gymnastics scene viewed by some as being the greatest death in the entire franchise. Also, the film nicely introduces a human killer into the mix, and that twist prequel reveal gives the franchise a sense of finality. That said, the second half of the film does feel a little rushed at times, and we have a really mixed bag of characters here. Jacqueline McInnes Wood's rocker chick Olivia steals most of the scenes she's in. David Kushner and PJ Byrne make for fantastic, unlikable douchebags, and human villain Peter Friedkin is a decent character, even if Miles Fisher puts in a mildly wooden performance. However, it's Nicholas D'Agosto and Emma Bell's two leads who really drag this one down. They're just, well, sort of there, all a bit dreary and nondescript. So yes, Final Destination 5 has several plus points, but it is far from flawless. Number 4, Final Destination, the film that started it all, launching a property that's gone on to make, as of this recording, around about $890 million, which is a fair chunk of change. White knuckle tension, check. A grueling opening disaster, check. A clever network of omens and clues, check. A well-judged darkly comedic tone, check. Ferociously brutal death scenes that'll make you afraid of innocent everyday items, absolutely triple check. Another thing that Final Destination did perfectly was establishing the rules of, well, Final Destination. The film may be a little more reserved and less violent than some of its sequels, but it's also more characterful than most of those follow-ups, with the group who survived the opening plane crash, led by Alex, feeling more real than some of the later casts. Plus, there is a nice emphasis on the traumatic effects of survivors' guilt. Of course, Tony Todd's cameo here is also legendary, and Devon Sawa, he makes for an excellent lead. The film's ending may be a little too open-ended for some people, but all in all, this was a great way to kick off what's now become a powerhouse horror franchise. Number 3, Final Destination 2. Truth be told, Final Destination 2 is my absolute personal favourite of the Final Destinations. But is it the best? Even with my rose-tinted glasses on, I have to be honest and say a couple of other films are technically slightly better, I will admit that. Still, while those films may just about be better, Final Destination 2 does have the greatest opening of the entire lot. Yes, that absolute masterpiece of a road pile-up that still, to this very day, has people scared to drive behind log trucks. And man, does this one amp up the death sequences from the first movie, with Final Destination 2 boasting some of the very best, most innovative kills in the entire series. Again, a personal favourite being Evan getting a fire escape ladder through his eye, or the young kid Tim who's squished by a giant pane of glass, or Nora and her elevator death. Now, the film does lose some points for killing the first movie's Alex Browning off, and off-screen no less, but there is surprisingly somewhat of a happy ending for Kimberly and Burke, even if they aren't the most likeable of survivors. Though, then there's also the death of Ali Larter's Clear Rivers, so yeah, that kinda sucks. So yeah, for me, Final Destination 2 is my personal favourite, but even I will admit that there are two more Final Destination movies that are actually, you know, a bit better. Number 2, Final Destination 3. Speaking of great deaths, Final Destination 3 is another film that has some of the best in the series. Tanning beds, anyone? I didn't think so. Although, granted, the opening roller coaster crash has aged pretty horrendously in the years since the film's 2006 release, which, man, realising that this third film is on the cusp of turning 20 years old, that is absolutely terrifying. Anyway, away from making myself, and probably some of you, feel extremely ancient, back to this threequel and an opening scene that just feels too unrealistic to take seriously, even for a Final Destination movie. That said, Final Destination 3 could well be one of the most purely entertaining horror sequels ever made, complete with a plethora of palm-sweating, nail-biting, stomach-churning, paranoia-twitching series of accidents and fake-outs dotted across the film, and it also has a lovely sense of pitch-black humour to it all as well. And unlike Final Destination 2, our leads of Wendy and Kevin, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Ryan Merriman, are actually, you know, quite likeable. And even the supporting characters, while a smidge stereotypical, they are a pretty entertaining group. And we also get the franchise's first human villain, that'd be Ian. It does repeat some of the formula of the first two movies, but that's kind of to be expected with the franchise. But also, the parts it repeats, it does really, really well. Number 1, Final Destination Bloodlines. Yes, that means that the Final Destination film getting the top spot here in this video, it is indeed the most recent film. After a 14-year break, you'd be forgiven for going in with low expectations for Bloodlines. I mean, how many times have franchises lazily returned to the well simply for another cash grab, revisiting something from the past and just dumping it in cinemas regardless of any quality, all in the hope of making a few quid, or dollars for our US viewers. But man, Bloodlines was good, like really, really good, managing to give you some of what you'd expect from a Final Destination movie, but also shaking things up in certain other regards. This is a film that is terrifyingly visceral, has an element of almost Hitchcockian suspense to it, has a phenomenal opening disaster that nearly matches that Final Destination 2 one. And you know what? If you were to say it tops Final Destination 2's opener, okay, I'll actually allow it. There's a splendid sense of wicked humour here, a treasure trove of Easter eggs for repeat viewings, and of course, one final appearance from the late, great Tony Todd, who bows out in incredibly moving fashion in what was the final performance of Tony's legendary career, may he rest well. And directors Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stain, they do an outstanding job with Bloodlines. This film gives fans what they wanted, but what really makes it special is the extra yards it goes to above and beyond that. Other Final Destinations have had their fair share of flaws, awkward exposition, hit and miss acting to say the least, but there's none of that here. The cast does a great job, the dialogue feels natural and never ever clunky, and you end up actually caring about this group of characters, pulling for at least a few of them to please make it out alive, even if, you know, that doesn't end up being the case, sadly. That final fake out, okay, maybe it was a little too much, maybe a little too cruel, but other than that, a phenomenal job that has excitement high for the future of this much loved franchise. Bravo!